something that was possible. So the answer to your question is, it was really exciting once it had time to sink in, and we realized what we had done, and that here's the best part of it, is that anybody can do anything they want to do if they put their mind to it. This is just one of those examples. So when you hear your teachers say that, they're not just making that up. That's really true.
Okay, thank you. All right, next is Rachel. Nice and loud, nice and loud.
To your knowledge, what are you guys doing to this day?
What are all the guys doing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll start with Oscar. Oscar now currently works for the BNSF Railroad. He started working there after he served his tour of duty in Afghanistan. And he started off as an engineer running the shop where they repaired diesel locomotives. But now he's moved into the programming side of it, so he teaches people how to program a lot of the stuff that controls the trains, because as you probably noticed, there's a lot more computer technology going into all the different things that run stuff around the city, and I mean, planes, trains, cars, everything. So that's what his job is now. Christian, when the movie started making its debut in the theaters, he used crowdsourcing to raise funding to go back to school, because he wasn't able to finish school because the tuition on him was quadrupled because of some immigration legislation. And so he couldn't finish school at the time. So 10 years later, he was able to raise enough money to go back to school. But I think it was very difficult for him. He wasn't able to organize his life in a way that would allow him to get the best, the benefit out of the schooling he was going to get. And so he wasn't able to finish. And all of us have kind of lost contact with him. So we feel that maybe he feels like he let himself down and doesn't want to communicate with us. So, you know, that's an example of when you hear people say, you know, if you drop out of school, it's very hard to come back. There's an example right there that once life starts and you have to engage in, you know, making a living, it's very difficult to go back to school. So you should keep school as your top priority if you want to make sure you get it done. Lorenzo now owns his own catering business, and it's called Nida Aki, Nida Aya, which means neither here nor there. So it's kind of a play on his immigration status that he's been going through in his life. But he's been pretty successful at it. He was able to, again, crowdsource and fundraise during the height of the movie's success in the theaters, and was able to raise enough money to buy a food truck, and so he does a lot of catering. Luis, the big guy, works as a supervisor for a company that does cleaning in buildings and things like that. So if you look at it, for the most part, everybody got what they wanted, but not all of them became engineers, which is something that's interesting, at least with those 4 kids.
Okay, thank you. Next is Oliver.
Hi. My question for you is basically, how much of a chance do you guys actually think you had in the competition? Remember in the book of the movie, it said that you guys didn't think you had a big chance. I wanted to know about how much was that?
I'm not sure I heard you exactly.
You got to speak louder.
How much chance we had to win?
Just what place did you think you guys would get in the competition?
Well, prior to going to the competition, we were looking at, well, I'll put it this way, the teachers were looking at getting last. And the students were hoping just to beat one college, because that's how we kind of sold it. What we wanted to do was use it as a learning experience. And we learned through our other competitions that we learn the most when we fail, because if you look at how you failed and you analyze the things that made you fail, and then you look at, well, if I come back next year, what can I do not to fail? So our plan was, we wanted to learn the most. So in order to do that, we had to fail as spectacularly as possible. So we'd have a lot of things that we could improve upon. So our plan was to go there, and because it's a week-long competition, we wanted to basically interview each of the teams, like what components they were using, what was their strategy, and we'd take all these notes. And then in the evenings, we were going to put these notes on the wall, and we'd say, okay, if we have a year, how many of these things that these teams are doing can we do so that we can come back and be competitive? So we were going to use this whole thing as an experiment to make ourselves get better by studying our failures or the things that we couldn't do. So that was what we were trying to do. But the way we sold it to the kids was, look, if you enter in the high school category, you're probably going to get beat because you've never built underwater robots. And that's a little more embarrassing when you come back, you have to explain why you were in last place, right? But if you're last place in the college category, you can just say, well, you know, they're college kids. We're supposed to get beat by them. But if you accidentally beat a college team, you could brag about how you beat a college team. So that's how we convinced the kids to do it. But from the teacher standpoint, we had very low expectations of anything resulting in anything close to a win. Having said that, after we saw the underwater portion, we saw that we weren't in as bad a shape as we thought. That there were teams there that may know more than us, but they were not performing as well as we did. Now, again, we still didn't think we'd be in the top 3, maybe 5th or 6th or something like that, because the idea of outdoing someone, you know, the college kids with an oral presentation or a technical report was the furthest thing from our minds. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
All right, next up is Laurelie.
Aside from funding, what conditions in the competition made the process challenging?
Well, I think the fact that, you know, myself, I'm not an engineer, you know, although I can say this, I play one on TV, but I'm not an engineer. And the other teacher that was in the program, his master's was in education. So I guess the most challenging thing for us is we weren't aware of what technology, if we could afford it, was out there that would help us. So between us and the kids, we were solving this problem, I guess, on a Home Depot level. What we can think of that would basically achieve the result. I mean, like the tape measure, for example. We knew a steel tape measure would rust, but we also knew it was like $6 and you can buy another one, and we only needed it to work once. So for us, you know, we didn't think about, you know, laser tape measures and other stuff because it was just out of our price budget, and, you know, we weren't sure if it was going to work underwater or not. So for us, doing that type of thing where you just have a camera aiming at a tape measure, you know. So I would say the challenge for us was trying to figure out what we can do with stuff that was around us to achieve the goals of the competition at a Home Depot level.
All right. Okay, thank you. Next is Alison.
Is the process to become documented different in Arizona for people from countries other than Mexico?
That's a very good question. I would say that the process would be the same. Where it becomes different is how you came into the United States. So if you came illegally, then there's some repercussions that may occur. But just your country of origin, I think the process is the same. But there is a difference in the number of people they allow from certain countries. So the government somehow makes a count. Let's say maybe 100 people a year come from Mexico, 200 a year can come from, you know, Germany. So they have these quotas that they allow, and I don't know exactly how they determine that. Maybe by how many people they think they can get from those countries that could add to the workforce. But as far as the process, like if you were brought here as a child, that's a little more complicated because you have to go through the process of explaining how you came here, why you stayed. You know, for Oscar, when he turned 18, if you stay in the United States past 18, you automatically get a 10-year penalty because now you're an adult and you're violating a law. If you go back as a kid and start the process, they don't use your time in the United States against you. So you see how this starts to get confusing? So it really depends on how you came here, when you came here, and under what condition. So that's that. I hope that helps answer.
Okay, thank you. Next is Charlie.
What were your first impressions of the team?
Wow, okay. Well, 2 of the kids were in my marine science class, so I knew that they were pretty sharp, but I knew they didn't have much experience in robotics or any kind of technology because they hadn't been part of our robotics team. The other two, Lorenzo and Christian, were on the robotics team, so I knew that they knew a little bit. So what I did was with Oscar and Luis, the two seniors in the marine science research class, I gave them the option. I said, look, you can do all this marine science stuff, okay, all these assignments, or you can join the robotics team and do this underwater robotics competition. And they probably thought it was going to be less work. But it turned out it was actually probably more work. But it's just a different kind of work. And they had to give up some of their summer in order to go to the competition. So my impression was I wasn't quite sure if the two kids that weren't into robotics initially would like it as much as they did. So that was I wasn't sure if the team was going to connect together. I thought maybe they would stay separate, or maybe the two kids in marine science would drop out once the summer started. But as the team started to form and they started to work together, Oscar naturally just seemed to take over as the leader, and pretty much the other kids followed him. So I saw that it was starting to gel together.
Okay, thank you. Next is Xander.
So what was the hardest thing you had to do after the competition was over?
The hardest thing after the competition was trying to figure out why the news media and the people around the world weren't captivated by the story, because it blew our minds. We were sending out press releases to everybody we could, and we were getting no responses. And so we didn't, there's a term for this now that didn't exist back then. It's called fake news. So if someone gets a press release that says these kids from an inner city school with food stamps beat MIT, they probably just deleted the email thinking, oh, this is fake, this isn't real. But see, a real reporter would have checked. And so Josh Davis called me and asked me, is this true? And I said, well, you don't have to listen to me. You can call MIT and ask them if, how it felt to lose to us, right? And so he did. And 10 minutes later, he called me back, and he couldn't believe that no other reporter checked the story. So there's a good lesson there. Just because you see a headline out there doesn't immediately make it fake. You might want to check to see, look at other sources. Because that guy lucked out. I mean, he made a ton of money because he sold it as a movie deal. And then the documentary, and then the IMAX film, and then the book. And all it took was for him to just check to see if the story was legit. So he deserved what he got. Can you imagine how many other reporters saw it and now think, oh my God, I deleted it. It was real. So that was the most frustrating part. I mean, we were even trying to get on the David Letterman show, because he used to have this aquarium, and there was a game, it was called Does It Float? And so you're supposed to think of something that you're not sure if it floats or not and put it in the aquarium, and then, if it sinks, people laugh. If it floats, maybe people laugh. So we were thinking, if we can get on the show and throw Stinky in that thing, maybe we'd get some publicity that way. We were desperate.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next is Fernanda.
Hi. My question is, how did Lorenzo Santillan's mother react to the fact that his son was in a robotics team that went against MIT?
Well, that's a very good question, because the parents of the kids didn't have even finished high school. So the idea of what MIT is to them is very foreign. They don't understand. They don't understand what that level of education means. In fact, when we first printed the list of the schools we were going against, even Lorenzo himself walked up, because we had it taped on the wall, and I highlighted Carl Hayden because I thought it was real cute that here's Carl Hayden High School, and there's UC Davis, Stanford, MIT, and he comes up and points to one and says, what's MIT? And so I had to explain what MIT was. And right after I explained that, it didn't even faze him, okay? Because again, it was something out of his comprehension. He just said, well, if we beat MIT, will you take us to Hooters? And And so I thought, okay, there's no chance we're ever going to beat MIT. So I said, yeah, I'll take you and the whole team to Hooters. But, you know, as it turns out, I shouldn't have made that bet. But I thought in education that was probably the safest bet on the planet. And something as a teacher you might want to consider is if you decide, don't bet against the students.
No.
Because they might win. But I don't think the parents understood. It's very foreign to them. When they've only had a 4th or 5th grade or 6th grade education, they don't know what it means to be at a university. So I don't think it meant that much to the parents because they're confused. They didn't know what was going on.
Okay.
So that's my take on it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Next is Zeke.
All right, so did you like see the movie? First question. All right, so what did you think of the movie? Like, what was your opinion on it?
So the Hollywood version, for some reason, Hollywood has a formula. They think they have a plan on what makes a movie successful and what doesn't. So one of the things I didn't like about the movie was there were 2 teachers involved, 2 male teachers. And to them, that wasn't a good formula. One of them had to be female. So I joked that they turned Dr. Cameron into Marissa Tomei because he was from the programming side and she was supposed to be the one teaching George Lopez programming. So I told Alan that he's my girlfriend in the movie. But, so that, you know, that kind of stuff, it's hard to argue because once you sign the contract, they can do whatever they want. And the idea when they say it's based on a true story, that's exactly what that means. They can change it. But in a nutshell, about 40% of what George Lopez went through is the kind of stuff that I would go through. And any teacher that, you know, he captured what it was like for a teacher to get involved with the lives of their students. And I got the opportunity to be on the set for 2 weeks. There were a lot of times he'd come up to me and ask me if that's the way I would do it. Because, I mean, he's never been a teacher, so he doesn't know what you do. I do have to say one thing that, you know, I have gone to parents' houses, but I never took tequila. When I saw that the movie did that, I thought, that was probably a good idea. I probably should have took tequila. But, you know, I wasn't thinking about that, trying to bond with a parent on that level. But I did have arguments, and so that's what. So 40% of what you see him do is accurate. About 80% of what you see the kids do is true. So, like, did Oscar have a girlfriend when he was in high school? No, he had one right after high school. So, did they change that a little bit? Yeah, because they wanted that in the story. So just keep that in mind when you see movies that are based on real life. Certain parts of it may be fictitious, made up, because the people who are making the movie think it will make the movie better. Where you don't see that happen is in documentaries, because the whole point of the documentary is to be accurate. So if you haven't seen Underwater Dreams, you should see that because that's accurate. So I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you. Next up is Zach.
So before the robotics club, since most of the teams got bullied at like school and at home, why wouldn't they just like leave and go run off on their own?
So you're just saying, why didn't they just try to get away?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have to go to school, so you can't not go to school. And Lorenzo, in particular, was the one that was predominantly picked on. Christian might have been picked on a little bit because he's kind of a smart aleck, and he might say something that would irritate people, and then they'd pick on him. But he kind of was able to fight back a little bit. Lorenzo, on the other hand, had very low self-esteem, and it was difficult for him to not break down and suffer from the people picking on him. I mean, there were times that people had threw, on the stairwell, had thrown gum in his hair because he had a mullet. He had long hair in the back. And he'd come up to us, and we'd have to take scissors and try to get the gum out of his hair. You know, he's crying the whole time. So part of it is that I mean, you have to go to school, so you can't avoid it. But if you start to hang around the right people, I guess, if you want to call it that, The other groups might not pick on you as much because now you're part of another group that's maybe sort of respected. He definitely didn't get picked on once we won. There were a lot of kids that wanted to be like him after he won. But prior to that, no, he was a target. And that's one thing, if you saw the Hollywood movie, they made Lorenzo a little tougher in the movie, but in real life, Lorenzo wasn't a fighter. He was the one that would break down a little bit, and Christian was the one that was a little bit tougher as far as, he'd punch someone back if someone said something to him. But again, Hollywood felt that it was better for Lorenzo to be tougher, so they made him tougher.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Sebastian.
Hi.
Hello.
Did your family have to go through the citizenship process? Not bad.
So when you say my family, do you mean the family like I'm married to now, or do you mean the family I came from?
Came from.
Yes. At age 18, I went through the naturalization process, so I had to take a test about America, and which I found interesting because most of the people I knew that were American didn't know the answers, so I found that very interesting. My parents then became citizens probably 10 or 15 years after that. At that time, it wasn't as difficult, and both my parents were doctors, so the people doing the review, they go, oh, we can have more doctors. So for them, it wasn't a difficulty. I think it would be a little more difficult now because I'm from Iran, so they might not allow me to become a citizen now for whatever reason, because there seems to be less logic in today's process, but other than the fact of where you're from. But I've been here my entire life, except for the fact that I just wasn't born here. So, in a way, I share a commonality with a lot of the immigrant students that I worked with. It was just a different country.
Okay, thank you. Next is Emmanuel.
Hi there.
Hello.
Do you still in contact with the boys?
Yes, I'm in contact with all the boys except Christian. He just kind of dropped off the face of the earth right now, so we don't know what's going on with him. But I'd probably say the one I'm in the most contact with is Oscar, because he also travels around the country doing speaking engagements. And sometimes we actually go to the same place to do the same speaking engagement. Lorenzo's the next one I stay in contact with. He's on Facebook, and he emails me and calls me all the time, too. So those two are the most I stay in contact with.
Right. Thank you.
How has the school's culture changed since the win in 2004?
Well, it got better. I can't say it totally changed. I mean, it's 2,000 plus students. But what it did do is that the number of students going to college increased, not just on the robotics team, but in the school in general, because the school's reputation started changing. Kids would say that they would go to another place and they'd be wearing a shirt that says Carl Hayden, and people would point to them and say, hey, you're that school where the robotics kids come from. So the idea that they weren't being identified as a negative school, the school with the gangs and the violence and the drugs and all that, kind of helped the morale of the school, so people, even not on our team, thought that they could achieve. There were times when we'd come back from a robotics competition and the football team went out of their way to walk toward us and tell us good job, because I guess they heard about the latest competition that we'd gone to. When does a football team walk over to a robotics team to tell them they did a good job? Never, right? So that idea that they appreciate what the team has done for the school's reputation was valued by even the football players. So there was this buoying up of the school's reputation. But after a while, unfortunately, I guess, when we started winning a lot, then a lot of the different groups on campus started getting, I guess, jealous, because they'd say, oh, well, you're on the robotics team because you guys do whatever, and you just win everything because you think you're so good. So a little bit of that started popping in, and I don't know how you stop that. I didn't want to lose to make them feel better.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, next is Kevin.
Hi. All right, so who has the trophy right now?
The trophy is currently at Carl Hayden High School when I was still teaching there, because I just retired after 30 years of teaching. But when I was there, it was in an area just in the corner of my classroom. I imagine it's still in that little, I guess you can call it a shrine area. But what's ironic is the trophies are made of wood that just look like someone made them up the night before. They're not this grand trophy like you see in the movie. It was a little piece of wood that said national champion. So if you look at that, it's just shocking that all this stuff happened, and yet the trophy is something you wouldn't even give out today.
Okay, thank you. Next is Victor.
How often do you go to Iran, and what is it like there?
I cannot go to Iran. If I go there, I would probably be kept there. They would think that I was an American spy because my English is too good and my Persian is terrible. They would also ask me why I wasn't there during the revolution when they were fighting, because I didn't serve in the military. My answer was I became a U.S. citizen and I didn't want to be part of the country over there. So I can't go back to Iran. If I did, I'd probably be thrown in prison or executed.
Okay. All right, thank you. Next is Griffin.
Okay, if a genie appeared and said you had one wish with no limits, what would you wish for?
To know what I know now when I was a teenager.
Oh, hey. Ooh. Okay. All right, and I'm going to ask you the last question because we're running out of time. So thank you. These guys are just like a couple months shy of going into high school. So what advice would you give them in order to be successful in their futures?
You need to engage with your high school. Don't just stay, in your classes. Join any club or sports or anything, because if you have some connectivity to the high school, time's going to go by better, you're going to enjoy it, you're going to make more friends. So get involved in as many different clubs or whatever your favorite activities are. Just going to school and going back back home is the worst thing you can do. Spend those 2 or 3 hours every day after school being involved in something. And if it's not with the school, find some club or organization in the city to belong to. You need to do something with your free time besides nothing.
All right, and with that, can we all say goodbye to Fredi? Bye! Okay. All right, let's do a quick debrief with the time we have remaining. So, what? Hello. Thank you. So, what is going to stick with you about this particular Skype call, or what did we learn about Fredi that we think is important? Victor?
That he can no longer return to Iran because he can be a prisoner or executed.
Right, I had no idea about that. That's pretty intense, right? Yeah.
I learned his advice about joining a club after school or in school is pretty good advice, because what I do when I go home, I just see what I can do around the house, and then I just work on a football club or something. But joining a club at the library is a good idea, and that's probably something I'll always stick with me.
Cool. Okay, what else? What are some other things that stuck out to you guys, especially the folks that didn't get to talk? Yeah.
It stuck out to me that he keeps in track. He still is in contact with the boys, but then Griffin has just kind of disappeared.
I'm kind of wondering about that.
You think they'd all be really close?
Right. I think probably the closest point that they had was when Oscar returned from his tour. But yeah, Luke.
He mentioned regarding Griffin that it's kind of really important to stay in school, because if you drop out of school, then it gets much harder to actually do it, and that kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, for sure. Elliot?
What surprised me was that the trophy still had Fredi.
Yeah, you think that somebody would get to keep that?
Also, it's crazy because he said it was just a wooden didn't look like professional.
Right, you would expect it to be way more glammed up. Yeah. So, just going back, to what Luke said, his observation is important. So we have maybe like 4 weeks left together. If you didn't realize that, now you do. Okay? So between now and then, really think about the kind of person you want to be when you start 9th grade this fall. And when we do get to the last week together, we will go back and revisit those letters you wrote to yourself at the start of the year.
I forgot about those! I forgot about those!
Okay, and with that, okay, we need to get this room back in order, so I need at least 6 volunteers to hang back when the bell for lunch rings, and I will bring you candy on Monday to say thank you. Okay. I will just bring, does it matter? Yes. I don't know.
Or how about from the bottom of your heart?
Yeah. What's wrong with that? Okay, Ethan 1, Ari 2, Rachel 3, 4, I need 2 more. 5, 6, perfect. Okay, can we please put all the green chairs back in Miss Hobush's room though? That's something we can help with right now. Blue chairs stay here, green goes back.